What's up guys, it's Chris from CTCMed, back from a bit of a hiatus. I've been studying for my MCAT for a while now, so that's taken up a good chunk of time as you'd imagine, but I thought I'd use my acquired skills to walk you through one of the more difficult sections, or at least one of the more perceived difficult sections on the test, the cars section. Mind you, I've not yet taken the cars section officially, but it seems, at least from practice, to be one of my stronger areas, thankfully. So I thought I'd do a walkthrough or a step-by-step of what my logic is and how I read the passage in order to score well in the section. Obviously, during this video, I'll be walking through it a bit slower than how you'd actually want to do it on the MCAT, because, you know, the car section is a pretty time-intensive section of the exam, but that's just the name of the game for the sake of this video's objective. Now, what I've got in front of me is an official AAMC cars passage with 7 questions. This is an actual AAMC resource. I'm not exactly sure if I'm allowed to be showing it, but let the record show that I'm acknowledging this material is not mine, and it is being used solely for educational and nonprofit purposes. Okay, so let's get started. There are 4 things I look for when dissecting a cars passage, and I'm sure you've gotten this advice before. Tone, main point, argument, and shifts. The first 2 seem pretty straightforward, where the tone is just any inflections in the author's rhetoric, and the main point is, what the passage is about. But the argument is a bit more nuanced. It's not exactly the main point, but rather a combination of the tone and main point. Shifts refer to any changes in the author's tone or argument, which just helps you understand the passage better overall. So, onto the passage. There is no doubt that what we call the modern movement in art begins with the single-minded determination of a French painter to see the world objectively. Emphasis on objectively. There need be no mystery about this word. What, and forgive me, I can't exactly pronounce this artist's name, so I'm going to refer to the artist as C, just for the sake of simplicity. There need be no mystery about this word. What C wished to see was the world, or that part of it he was contemplating, as an object. And that's important because this implies that there's been a different perception at a different point in time, because this is apparently revolutionary. Without any intervention, either of the tidy mind or the untidy emotions. His immediate predecessors, the Impressionists, had seen the world subjectively, that is to say, as it is presented itself to their senses in various lights, or from various points of view. See, there's a contrast. His predecessors want to see it subjectively. In comparison, he wants to see it objectively. Various points of view. Each occasion made a different and distinct impression on their senses. Let's say senses. And for each occasion, there must necessarily be a separate work of art. But C wished to exclude this shimmering and ambiguous surface of things and penetrate to the reality that did not change. So this seems important. C wanted to exclude any fluff that was going on in the art world and really get down to the nitty-gritty objectivity. That seems to be the direction the passage is going in. That was present beneath the bright but deceptive picture presented by the kaleidoscope of senses. So here we go again. C wants to really get down to this filtered perception of art. Our senses apparently are taken in too much at once, or something along those lines, and C really just wants to get rid of it all and just depict what's truly going on. Next paragraph. Great revolutionary leaders are people with a single and simple idea. It is the very persistency with which they pursue this idea that endows it with power. Okay, so great revolutionary leaders, they are characterized by having a single and simple idea, and it is it's their persistency that really makes them rule. That's what gives them their power and, I guess, their success. But let us ask why. In the long history of art, it had never previously happened that an artist should wish to see the world objectively. Okay, so this is a bit of a shift. The author is looking to explore why the artist's view is the way that it is, or why it's never came up in the past. We know, for example, that at various stages in the history of art, there have been attempts to make art imitative. Okay, so imitative at least is nothing new. And not only Greek and Roman art, but the Renaissance and classical art in Europe were periods of art possessed by a desire to represent the world as it really is. Okay, so there have been historical instances, we'll say the Greek and Roman art, and the Renaissance and classical art. Both periods where art wanted to be represented as it actually is. So this seems like it's nothing new. But here comes a shift. They're always intervened between the visual event and the act of realizing the vision, an activity which we can only call interpretive. Okay, so there's apparently this intermediary between the visual event and the act of realizing the vision. And by vision, I'm assuming it's the intended purpose of the artwork. So between the visual event of seeing the artwork and realizing the vision, there is an interpretation, which makes sense. This intervention seemed to be made necessary by the very nature of perception, which does not present to the senses a flat two-dimensional picture with precise boundaries, but here's another shift, but a central focus with a periphery of vaguely apprehended, seemingly distorted objects. Okay, so this is a bulky sentence. It stretches for like 4 lines. This intervention seemed to be made necessary. So this intermediary, that is the interpretation of an artist's work, is necessary by the nature of perception. So perception sort of brings along with it this interpretation. I guess you can't perceive something without interpreting it. Because, as the sentence follows, what you're perceiving is not just some two-dimensional picture with precise boundaries. You're sort of almost walking into the artist's world. It's a periphery of vaguely apprehended and distorted objects. It's something that requires perception. Think of Picasso. Like, if you looked at any of his paintings and you saw just a bunch of random shapes, no one would really, acknowledge him as such a great artist. However, because of our perception, we are able to, because it's so ambiguous and vague and has such distorted objects. Continuing, the artist might focus on a single object, say a human figure or even a human face, but even then there were problems such as that of representing the solidity of the object and its place in space. Okay, so the artist might focus on a single object. Here's some examples. But even when there were problems, such as representing the solidity of an object, so I guess there's just problems in depiction. Okay, so let's see how we continue from there. In every instance before C, in order to solve such problems, the artist brought in an extra visual faculty's imagination, which enabled the artist to transform the objects of the visible world and thus create an ideal space occupied by ideal forms, or intellect, which enabled the artist to construct a scientific chart, a perspective in which the object could be given an exact situation. Damn, that's a long sentence. All right, so let's say we could break this down. In every instance before C, okay, so these are instances before this artist that's being argued is revolutionary, or at least is a turning point in art history. So before this person, in order to solve these problems, so the problems in depicting the solidity or in depicting the reality of a painting, in order to solve that problem, the artist brought in an extra visual faculty's imagination. Which enabled the artist to transform the objects in the objects of the visible world. Okay, so whatever this extra visual faculty's imagination is, it allowed the artist to transform the visual world, or transform the objects of the visible world, and thus to create an ideal space occupied by ideal forms. Okay, so we're transforming real-world objects into this ideal depiction of them, I think. Okay, occupied by ideal forms. Or intellect, which enabled the artist to construct a scientific chart, a perspective in which the object could be given an exact situation. Or intellect, which enabled the artist to construct a scientific chart, a perspective. I'm going to say perspective is the most important phrase there because it just, coincides with the rest of the passage. I'm not exactly sure what they're getting at with the rest of that, but if you only need to pick out a certain amount of it. You don't need to understand the whole passage word for word. You just need to understand really those 4 points I gave you before. So I think this somewhat allows me to get that. But, here's another shift, but a system of perspective is no more an accurate representation of what the eyes see than a Mercator's projection is what the world looks like from Sirius. Okay, so the author here is saying that a system of perspectives that these artists are giving is not so much an accurate depiction of real life, and the author is comparing that to a Mercator's projection. Okay, so now we're comparing depiction of reality in paintings to a map. Okay, what purpose does that serve? A perspective in which the objects could be given an exact situation. Okay. I think the author is getting that. There's a perspective that the artist is trying to give. However, perspective, much like a map, doesn't necessarily mean that is exactly what it looks like. It's just how you can best represent it in a 2D world. But I'll move on. Like the map, okay, this might have helped. Like the map, it serves to guide the intellect. Perspective does not give any glimpse of reality. Okay, so that explained it way better. The map serves to guide the intellect. So, a map is not truly what the world looks like per se, because you can't depict the world in its exact construction, I guess you'd say, on a 2D surface, especially it's a flat piece of paper. That's why Mercator projections are usually distorted in the whole 9 yards. So maps just serve as a guide. Perspective, in the same fashion, is just a guide for your interpretation of a painting. Because, again, it's a 2D surface. In the last paragraph, one might conclude from the history of art that reality in this sense is a will-o'-the-wisp. In actuality, we can see but never grasp. Okay, so that makes sense given the tone. One might conclude. Okay, so given that the author is saying one might conclude, this could be turned around, meaning there could be a shift approaching. So this is something you kind of want to watch out for. One might conclude from the history of art that reality in this sense is a will-o'-the-wisp. So this comma is implying that a will-o'-the-wisp is just an actuality we can never grasp, or we can see but never grasp. Nature, as we say, is one thing, art quite another. But see, though he was familiar with the art of the museums and respected the attempts of his predecessors to come to terms with nature, did not despair on succeeding where they had failed, that is to say, in realizing his sensations in the presence of nature.